Well, happy Friday, everyone. It's Lisa Nirell. And yes, it is Friday, January 8th. I want to first say happy and healthy 2021 to all of you joining us from around the globe. We're streaming live here on LinkedIn, Facebook, and YouTube today. I wanted to start the year with some positive insights and preparation for action this year. So I am thrilled to introduce in a moment Sally Helgesen to help us do just that. I'm also joined today in the background by Tim Sohn, our executive producer for the LinkedIn and Mindful Marketer live streams. So I hope this session today brings a sense of belonging and positivity to the week ahead, and to let you know that now you're part of this great community of mindful marketers from across the globe. Speaking of belonging, I believe, I don't make a lot of predictions every year, but I will tell you this. I think 2021 is the year of belonging, of finding people to hold you up, whether you're behind a screen, behind the driver's seat, or behind a socially distanced restaurant chair. So I want you to know that I'm very committed to building community in all aspects of my life. And that's why you can also find me now through the Knowable audio courses that are now available for purchase and download at knowable.fyi. So you'll see here there is a link for you to download the first course free. The introduction is free, and then you can, on the go while cooking, while driving, or running that beautiful outside trail, you can listen to how you too can build your own professional community. So I hope you'll do that. So let's talk about one of my favorite communities, my favorite professional communities. It's the Marshall Goldsmith 100 Coaches community. And one of my favorite members is Sally Helgesen. She and I met through the one and only Marshall Goldsmith, who launched the 100 Coaches community just a few years ago. Now, before Sally joins us, I'm going to give you a brief introduction because Sally doesn't need a long introduction. Forbes has named Sally the world's premier expert on women's leadership. She's an internationally known best-selling author of many books and also a leadership coach in very high demand. She's written books, her most recent one, How Women Rise. She also looks at the behaviors of successful women and what holds them back. Her other books include The Female Advantage, Women's Ways of Leadership, The Female Vision, and The Web of Inclusion, which was highly acclaimed by the Wall Street Journal. So without further ado, today we're going to unpack how women can rise even in a virtual world. Sally, I am so glad you're with me today. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Lisa. It's wonderful to be here and to be with your audience.
Well, I want to remind people too, Sally, to let us know where they're from, and that we are going to be taking questions throughout the next 40 minutes of the live stream. So we're going to see what kind of issues are on men's and women's minds. So this will be fun, I am sure. And so let's talk for a minute. Where do we find you today? Where are you during this pandemic moment?
I'm where I have been every single day and moment since March 10th, which is at home. I live in the Hudson Valley. It's a good place to be pretty much sheltering in place, which is what we've been doing and will be doing until we get a vaccine.
Yes, and thank goodness we have several vaccines right now. So we're all very hopeful on that. And what have you seen? I know you coach a lot of top women leaders, and all of our members in our community tend to be either CEOs or chief marketing officers. What is the biggest threat to women's leadership potential and efficacy now that COVID is still rearing its ugly head? What are you seeing?
Well, I think that the primary issue is really the demands that are on a lot of women's time. I know that there's a lot of concern about visibility using a virtual medium. And I haven't seen that as much. But as I see the demands on time, especially women who have young children, it's very, very challenging. And I think, has the potential to slow people's career down a little bit if they're having a lot of difficulty managing that right now. But I think it's important to recognize that part of the reason this is so difficult is not just that so many people who can are working from home. It's also that the schools are closed and many people can't have anyone in to help with their children. So I think that creates some distinctive aspects about how the pandemic has impacted this that will be over. But in terms of visibility, I had a note the other day, a correspondence from a woman who had just read my book, and she is at the U.S. Naval College of War presently. She's a government, a Pentagon employee. And she said that what she's found is that actually she feels that there's more willingness to listen for the men. She's in with a lot of men, as you can imagine. She said there's more willingness for them to listen to her, and she feels that she actually has less problems with visibility being on Zoom just because people aren't interacting with one another, at least in an obvious way. It's pretty impossible unless they're on the chat. With one another. So she said she feels she's actually getting more attention. She talked a little bit about how that manifested. And I was fascinated, began a correspondence with her. I'm actually going to write about it in my LinkedIn newsletter next week, because I think that what I'm seeing is there's some positives and there's some negatives.
Yes, definitely. I made it through 18 chapters of your book, How Women Rise. And, the first thing I asked myself, I actually practiced one of the behaviors that hold me back, which was I was ruminating. And I was ruminating on why on earth did I not read this book 25 years, when it came out in the 90s. The book was actually not launched in the 90s. It was launched more recently, but it's so
2018, yeah.
2018.
Yeah.
But I thought, oh my gosh, why didn't I read this in 2018? Because it's filled with so many nuggets, and more importantly, I'm going to just give you a plug here, because you've earned it in this book. Is yes, you have the research, and you co-authored this with Marshall Goldsmith. However, I love the anecdotes that you provide, which are examples of how to address these limiting habits. So I really love that about the book.
Yeah, that's, I think, why this book has been so successful and very successful globally. Over the holidays, I got the Turkish, the Korean, and the Hebrew editions. So we've had a lot of success with it. And I think it's because it's very action oriented. A lot of it comes from the women's leadership workshops I've been doing now for almost 30 years. So there's a lot of real life anecdotes in there exactly about the most powerful ways to address what's holding you back. That really comes from women that I've worked with.
I also like how you spend time defining these habits and what they really do to a woman's professional life. And one of my favorite quotes is, "Your habits are not you. They are you on autopilot." So during COVID, I know you spend quite a bit of your day not only speaking and doing virtual keynotes, but you also, like myself, you're coaching senior executive leaders out there in the metaphorical trenches. Talk to us about maybe three or four habits that you think, sadly, have become amplified during COVID.
Well, I do think that it's not even so much that the habits have become more amplified, it's that they're visible in different ways. And perfectionism, on one hand, this is the perfect time to practice letting go of perfectionism because it's really difficult to try to imagine we're perfect in this environment with so many challenges. And yet, So I think that gets in women's ways subtly, and it's a little bit more visible. I watch it in overmanaging, trying to overmanage certain situations. So I see that coming up. With younger women, this is not so much true with senior executives, because usually by the time you've reached that kind of position, you've worked out some of the communication habits. But especially with younger women, communication habits around minimizing, oh, I just have one thing to say, or this will only take a minute, or too much information, too much background, too many details, too many words. Those things are very vividly apparent when we're communicating virtually, especially when the camera's right on your face. So I think that though they're slightly more penalizing than they even perhaps were in a real environment. So that's a little bit of what I see. But also, at least I do observe an increase in rumination. And I think that's partly because we don't have those human interactions every day. And every one of us is supported by our networks, personal, tactical, and strategic. And those can be a little bit harder to connect with informally. Scheduling a Zoom call is great, but bumping into somebody when you're getting your coffee, there is something to be said for that as well.
There really is. It's so powerful, and we do miss that face-to-face interaction. I will also share with people that one of the things I started doing back in April when COVID was in full swing is for the clients that I do have who live within a 40 or 50 mile radius of my home, we have walkabout meetings. So we have found those to be very effective. So for anyone who lives anywhere near a walking trail, a plein air setting, get your walking shoes on and find a way to have a healthy distance meeting while walking. It can be very restorative.
That's great.
Yes. So those are some ideas to think a little bit differently, even when we have these specific constraints. I also want to remind people this is a great time. If you've got some questions for Sally, feel free to post them, because we're currently broadcasting across Facebook, LinkedIn Live, and YouTube. Let's talk a little bit more, though, about rumination. We are spending more time alone for many of us, although some people may want more time alone, but now they're sharing a home with more people than they had hoped. What are some of the benefits you've seen of rumination, or what should women leaders look for that tell them, all right, you unpacked this enough, move on and, get on with it?
Yeah, I actually don't think rumination is ever good. Being thoughtful is good, but rumination is really paralysis by analysis to some extent. And it's something that multiple streams of research show that women are much more prone to than men. And that is, something happens, you mess something up, you forget something, and you give yourself a really hard time about it. Marshall once said to me, he said, Sally, for 40 years, I've worked with women, I've worked with CEOs, I've worked with, heads of global nonprofits, senior diplomats, senior commanding officers in the military, said, and there has never been a woman I've worked with where at some point I haven't had to say, please don't be so hard on yourself. And he said, I almost never have to say that with male clients. So whatever it is, we have a habit of giving ourselves a very hard time. And number one, we often believe that the more we analyze something, the less likely we'll be to do it again, because we've given it a thought and really unpacked it and figured out what was rooted in. And again, research shows that that's not true at all, that it's more likely to keep us stuck. It can spiral down into real depression and get you in the habit of negative self-talk, which is absolutely never constructive and is probably one of the factors in that causes we find women to be less confident than men, because our self-talk isn't that fabulous. It's not a continual stream of, boy, I nailed it, or, I told them, it's did I hurt their feelings, or should I have spoken then, or am I too soft, am I too loud, whatever. So it's really not helpful. Now, I'm not saying, we want to be obnoxious, but it's not helpful to keep going over and over our mistakes. It doesn't help us let them go. And so every one of us needs either a mantra or a reminder printed up on the wall. Mine says, oh, well, that sort of cues us not to go down that path.
Yes. And by the way, Sally, we have a question from a CEO in Washington, Eric. He has a question about general, I cannot speak. Oh, well, generational differences in concerns. So I'm not exactly clear what the question is behind that, but maybe we can unpack that together.
Well, if Eric's question concerns different generational differences in terms of in how women rise, really focusing on 12 habits and behaviors that are most likely to get in the way of women and hold them back from moving to a senior level. And many of these are habits and behaviors that may have served them earlier in their career. Perfectionism is a perfect example, but then can become problematic as they have greater range and scope of authority and more is expected of them. And they can really, really hold them back. So to some degree, there's a generational impact in terms of where people are in their career. For example, as I mentioned before, the communication habits, minimizing and too much, tend to be problematic with younger generations, in part because they have not progressed as much through their career. On the other hand, I do find differences. For example, two of the habits and behaviors that people really resonate with in the book, the number 1 and 2, are expecting others to spontaneously notice and value your contributions and reluctance to claim your achievements. And I find these to be endemic among women of, say over 45 or 50. And in a younger generation, not so much. They understand that visibility and connections are as important often as expertise to your career. So they tend to be less reluctant to claim their achievements. And that's, I think, usually a positive thing.
Yes, it can be. And the other positive thing to remember, and I quote from one of my mentors, Alan Weiss, if you don't toot your horn, there is no music.
Exactly. So we've all heard some pretty ugly music from horn tooting, so it can turn us off, but it shouldn't be. There are great ways to do it.
And, Eric, it really appreciated that feedback. And I also want to mention another strategy or tip, because our live streams, which are every first 3 Fridays of every week here on LinkedIn, Facebook, and YouTube at 1:30 p.m. One of the things we pride ourselves in as mindful marketers is we always provide strategies and pragmatic advice. I'm going to throw another one out there right now, which is that when it comes to rising within the organization, one of the things that my best clients are noticing is that their bosses have less and less time for them. And they're frustrated. And one of my clients on the West Coast, they're a large technology firm, said to me, I can't get on his darn calendar and I'm accomplishing a lot, but I need to report back. And I said, well, this is a call to action, which is I want you to start They're really good at designing these very sophisticated performance dashboards of how the company is doing, how the marketing team is doing, what projects they're working on. I said, where's your relationship dashboard? And they said, what's a relationship dashboard? I said, well, I learned this from Sally Helgesen. The stronger your relationships are, the stronger your boss's network becomes.
Yeah.
So I said, I challenged them and I said, I want you to send every 2 weeks, send your boss a short email with who I reached out to or who reached out to me, what they needed, how I helped them, and what any ongoing follow-ups needed. Just to give them an FYI of how you just strengthened their network as well.
Yeah. I think that one of the things that people who are effectively managing in this environment do is they find ways to convey what their contributions are. And I love to use the language of contributions and where their connections lie and how connected they are. They find ways to convey that is efficient and cost effective for the people who need to know. So it doesn't require a half an hour, can I get on your calendar? It can be a 2-line email that's very explicit about what you're contributing, and that will help keep you visible and keep your achievements out there.
Most definitely. I know we're already halfway through our session that I always lose track of time because this is so exciting and interesting. So I want to remind people that I am here with Sally Helgesen, whom Forbes named the go-to leadership expert when it comes to women's leadership. So I'm really glad we're unpacking some of these challenges of leading in a virtual world today and how we can rise. Now, here's another interesting thing that surfaced in your book and challenged my thinking as well, is you said that there is a downside to being highly loyal in your job.
Yeah.
Now, wait a second. I'm going, in the world of marketing in particular, our CEOs are constantly saying, how can I reduce turnover of my chief marketing officer? It's a very hot seat right now.
Reducing turnover means keeping your chief marketers happy. I'll give you that clue. But it's really interesting about I call it the loyalty trap. And it is that belief, that reluctance to move on in your career because you feel that your boss or your team would miss you too much, or that you owe something to them in terms of remaining in their orbit. I worked with a woman, coached a woman who was in a technology company in Boston. And she was a perfect example. She said that her boss came to her and he said, I was going to recommend you for that position. He said, but I realize you are invaluable. I cannot lose you. And she said she felt wonderful. She felt like, I do such a good job. He really likes me. I'm accepted here and everything. That's how she felt. But she said a couple months later, she started to think, so does that mean I'm going to be in this job for the rest of my life? I really do have the desire to move on. So she waited until something posted that she really, really wanted. And she walked into her boss's office and she said, and she didn't reference her, being invaluable or anything like that. She said, I really want this job and I need you to help me trying to get it. And he said, well, of course I will. You've done such a terrific job here. And what she realized in that was just because he saw her as invaluable, no, he was someone who had risen quite a bit in the organization himself. And he understood that's how it worked. And he joined with her and she was able to get that job. I see women also who are have this tremendous sense of loyalty to their team, where they feel like, I don't want to leave these people behind. I love them. We work so well together. We're a very harmonious group. And then that too can keep you stuck. And they often will feel like, well, it would be disloyal to these people. Guess what? Those people may benefit more by having you move to a higher position, because then they will know you. They'll have someone at that position that you're connected to. So I think these are important considerations. And I'm not advocating to not be loyal, but I'm advocating to not put your job before your career, to always be thinking not just of your job, but also the arc of your career, where you intend this to take you, what you intend to contribute going forward.
Oh my gosh, I love that. Okay, everybody, mic drop moment. Mic drop moment. I love the distinction here between job and career, because I use those words interchangeably sometimes, and that's my mistake. And I want people to also know that Sally and I both come from the same orientation, which is she just modeled having a growth mindset, which is I'm not waiting for the company to tell me what my next role is going to be. I am going to create my future. I want to create the vision of the life I want to have and how work embellishes the life I want to have. And by the way, I'm not using that as a judgment call. So if some people want someone to, design their career path, that you have to be willing to give up a lot of span of control as well and autonomy. But, I prefer, and I tend to attract clients who want to be the commander in chief of their own career and create that vision. So let's jump on over here. We have Jennifer from Washington, D.C. with a question for us, Sally.
Okay.
I have a large global team, very interdependent. When two of my strongest leaders are both women and they butt heads regularly, how do I help them see if they work together and lower tension between each other, that they will actually be more effective? Oh, I'm sure no one, Sally, has ever sent you that question before.
Exactly. I've seen that done at the highest level. I've seen that dealt with beautifully. Frances Hesselbein, who was a mentor to me, also a mentor to Marshall. I went to her 105th birthday party on Zoom a couple months ago. Frances Hesselbein, when she was National Executive Director of the Girl Scouts, was known for creating excellence at every possible level. And Peter Drucker actually called her the finest leader in America on the cover of the old Conference Board magazine. Frances, I was in a meeting once with Frances, and she had said to me before that she had these two women who worked for her, who were in her first circle of leadership, which is how she described it, because she didn't do hierarchy. And she said they're often vying for one another. They're vying for my attention. She said there's something they seem to do with each other that kind of sets the other off. And they're both very strong-willed, and very creative. So she had mentioned that to me. Then I was sitting in the meeting with her, and these women began to disagree about something that was very important. And I remember what Frances did. She just listened. She didn't, now girls, don't fight. No, not at all. She just listened. And then she said, Rosemary, Gina, you are both such great contributors. And I know that the two of you will schedule time to discuss this. You will work out a consensus between you, and then you will come and tell me what that is. In other words, I'm not going to adjudicate here. I'm not going to get in the middle, and I'm not going to manage your relationship. But I am holding you two accountable for working this out, for coming to a solution, then articulating a solution that you can both live with and bringing it to me, and then I'll know how to proceed and move forward. And it was such an effective way of doing that. And I was fascinated when I read an interview with Nancy Pelosi recently, in which the reporter, it was a male reporter at Politico, said, we know that one of the reasons you handle the House so effectively is that your father was the 6th-term mayor of Baltimore. And she said, no, that's not it, actually. It's that I had 5 children in 6 years. So I had to understand how to deal with all their conflicts. She said, and what I learned was that when you had 2 kids who were fighting over it, you sent them off and made sure they decided how they were going to deal with that, and then came back and told you the answer. And I thought, wow, worked for Nancy Pelosi with 5 children under 6, worked for Francis spectacularly. It's a question of discipline. We tend to want to weigh in, and we tend to want to manage that. We tend to want to make it okay. We're sorry that these 2 wonderful people can't really get along. But that's not really what our concern is. Our concern is creating a structure of accountability so that they don't have to like each other. They don't have to agree. If they want to squabble, they can do it on their own time. But they are accountable for together devising a solution. So that, to me, was an example of a very clear and actionable example of leadership at its finest around exactly the very knotty problem that Jennifer brings up.
Wow, that was great. Jennifer, clearly you hit a nerve for many of us who have teams. And we want to hire people who are stronger than we are in certain areas. We want to hire people who also are courageous enough and feel safe enough to disagree with us. I think one of the greatest things I've noticed is that my best clients who are building and cultivating their next generation of leaders, women or men, tell me that the best people that they like to promote are the ones who disagree with them for a good reason as quickly as possible, when they announce a new initiative, for example. So think about this as a marketing leader. If you're watching this right now, the last time you announced a new initiative, who in your organization stepped forward and said, let's do a pre-mortem and see what could possibly go wrong and push back now? Not 6 months into this when we've spent millions on trying to make it work. Those are the kinds of leaders you want to bring forward and cultivate that safe environment of healthy disagreement. So that's great. Jennifer, you're welcome. And it also, we can tell Jennifer's a courageous woman leader by just even having the courage to ask that question, because that's not a comfortable situation to be facing.
Yeah.
So we have a few more minutes together. I want to also ask you about the women who are working in environments with men with multiple different personality. I almost said multiple personality disorder, but I didn't mean to say that. Men with a number of personalities. As we are working behind a screen in a virtual world, what additional things do women need to watch for in their interactions with male leaders?
Well, I think that the virtual environment gives us many opportunities for exhibiting what we want to exhibit, which is a balance between professionalism and warmth. Women who I've worked with who've been remarkably successful somehow manage to balance those two. So professionalism is really important. So if you're on Zoom a lot, you want to, or whatever the platform is, WebEx or Teams, you really want to think about the professionalness of your presentation. You want to really be sure that your observations are succinct and concise and to the point. And you want to make sure that the observations that you make have real value and aren't either just because you told yourself this time you were finally going to speak up, or because you have a habit, I'm this way, of, as what Marshall calls, adding too much value. So you want to be intentional, really intentional about that. But at the same time, I think that ability to convey warmth and answers that come from the heart. That doesn't mean prefacing everything with "I feel this" or "I feel that," because that can diminish your authority. But to add some details that show that you're noticing human interaction and learning from that. We have a great opportunity to do that. And I don't think that the technology we're using now inhibits it. And when we're together, we kind of learn from that to present in that same kind of way. You know, professionalism requires being concise, being specific, being thoughtful, not feeling like you have to respond. Somebody says, "Oh, give me a moment to think about that," or "I'll get back to you tomorrow on that." We don't always have to respond. That's one of the disease to please habits I talk about and How Women Rise. But I think there's some real possibility for growth in that area in this rather challenging time we're in, and to the extent that we will be working much more virtually going forward as well.
Yes, the genie is not going back in the bottle.
Right. No.
For sure. And with that, I want to remind people we have time for one or two more questions. So now is your time to ask Sally anything you have related to being a better marketer, in being a better leader in a virtual world. And I also want to remind you that if you need to rush off after your lunch break and you miss any portions of our live streams, you can go sign up for our newsletter, and Tim will share with you the link that you can use so that you always receive announcements about our upcoming programs and our very special topics and guests. So make sure you go to themindfulmarketer.com/bonus. As I know, sometimes you have to run off to a meeting and sometimes you miss some important nuggets. I also like, Sally, the power of threes. So I would suggest that to people is when you do need to make a cogent point, break it down into 3 simple bites before you communicate it. Most of us, especially the men with whom I'm working, they remember 3 key points. They will not remember 18 strategic initiatives.
Exactly. That's exactly right. You know, that really relates to the chapter in there on too much, and that's, you know, offering too many details, too much background. I was a speechwriter before I got into this. Back in the 80s, I was a corporate speechwriter and in corporate communication. So as a speechwriter, you develop, it almost becomes part of your DNA to think in terms of threes. The human mind processes threes in a way that we do not process. I mean, you know, the Bible has many examples of 3 things: faith, hope, and charity. This is how human beings think. And so it's a very helpful thing I find in thinking about how you're going to frame your contributions, is to really think, not robotically, but let that inform your, you know, how you're thinking. That's certainly true for men and for women.
We've provided a lot of great tips today around how to deal with conflict within your organization, among top performers, how to communicate more succinctly, how to keep yourself balanced and focused as a leader, as a woman leader in particular, and how men can better understand women in their organizations. I mean, this session today was not just for women. So do you remember The Little Rascals, by the way?
Oh yeah, I do.
Do you remember I used to love that show, and it was black and white. And I remember the little boys when they formed the He-Man Woman Haters Club. Yeah. God, I love that. I just wanted everyone to know we're not.
Yeah, well, you know, for that, Darla was one of my personal role models there, because she really knew how to keep those boys in line when they formed the He-Man Club. It was great.
Absolutely. And humor is one of the best leadership tools we can all apply on a daily basis. Speaking about applying, what excites you about the year ahead, Sally?
The year ahead, first of all, I'm excited for a vaccine. I'm excited for beginning to be able to connect with people more in person again. But I'm also excited because I've had so much response for How Women Rise from men. I did a program for construction industry on women's leadership. It was a sign-up program. It was 65% men there. So I'm taking some of what I've learned over the last couple years and looking at how men and women can effectively rise together. So I'm very excited about developing that as a book and a little more formally as a workshop as well. So I think that's a thrilling thing.
Well, I'll do my best to keep up with you, Sally. I tell you, this is so, I am so honored that we get to work together, play together, and more importantly, laugh together. And we see each other several times a month in our online forums.
Yeah.
So how can people learn more about you, Sally? Where would you like to send people so they can stay abreast of your many developments?
Well, I'm, my website, sallyhelgesen.com. And also I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. I'm not the world's leading social media person, but I definitely respond there. I find it a very positive environment. So very glad to meet people through LinkedIn and have a lot. I find it a wonderful tool for learning about what other people are doing, sharing information about what we're all doing, and connecting and doing business.
Well, we'll have you come join us again to keep us posted. And I want to wish you a healthy and joyful year ahead, Sally. All the very best.
Thank you, Lisa, to you and to your audience as well.
It's great. And again, the answers just keep coming in. Great reminder about the power of 3. Big thanks and best to you, LinkedIn user, wherever you are. And Eric, you're welcome too. I'm so glad you were able to make it. Come back every first 3 Fridays of the month because we always have an issue that we pull from that our CMOs and CEOs are asking us to address. So let me tell you folks, as we wrap up, I have 1 more minute and I hope you'll stick around here. Keep in touch with Sally. And I want to have you join us next week as well. On January 15th, I'll be sitting down with my friend Drew Boyd, who is a LinkedIn celebrity in his own right. He is a former CMO, marketing innovation expert, thought leader, and 4-time author. His new book is coming out very soon, and we're going to be talking about customer retention strategies post-COVID. So if you are a mindful marketer, you're already thinking about what's going to be the future once we have herd immunity and some people are going to wholeheartedly return back to work. So as a marketer, you need to start asking what's next. And we're going to provide you with some very cogent tips around that. So I hope you'll join us. And if you had to leave or you want to watch some of our past replays, remember, you can go to my website at lisanirell.com and watch. Now we have about 28 replays out there and counting, as well as many podcasts and excerpts from some of my keynote talks. So with that, I want to wrap up and thank you all for participating in today's Mindful Marketer live stream. Stay healthy, stay safe, and we'll see you next week.